Engelbrecht. I'm one of the leaders here at King Street. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I have to tell you, we have got a great, great speaker, one of my new favorite authors, I have to say. Mr. Oleg Atbashian was born in the USSR. He came to America in 1994 and really wanted to get away from politics. And lo and behold, found himself waging for a period of time, a one-person and quickly a much larger than that communication effort to try and wake people up to the truth of what he had already seen happen once before. And the way he does it, the way he writes, the way he uses satire, and the way he uses his illustrations are unique. And I think you're all going to get a big kick out of what he has to say, and also take a lot of good messages back with you from it. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me in joining Oleg Atbashian. So I picked this up in D.C. and I tell you what, I couldn't put it down, because I don't know about y'all, but it's still difficult for me to sometimes, even with everything I'm involved with, to come to grips with the reality of what the speed at which we're seeing things happen in our country, the reality of the undeniable path that we are on. And it is socialism at best, stunning in its speed, and really difficult to really wrap your head around. And so you read this, and the way that you approach things, the way that you explain things, is really, really fantastic. And of course, these books are for sale back there at the end of the night. Please get one. But tell us about, first of all, tell us about growing up in the USSR.
Well, of course, as all Soviet children, I grew up believing in communism because there were no other sources of information available.
Right.
All the media, all the entertainment industries, the teachers were telling us these things, that communism is the future, and when we grow up we may as well enjoy this great life where there would be no need to worry about money, everything would be readily available, the abundance of things, and you know, what's not to like? It's like extended childhood. You never grow up. But as I was maturing a little bit, I began to see signs of hypocrisy and corruption, and some contradictions within the system. And at first, as many people did, I attributed it to the wrong implementation of the great idea, because I still believe the idea was very good. It was very alluring. And that's why it's very alluring here to the leftists, to the socialists in this country as well. And I understand why. That's why I feel I have the qualifications to write about it. Then eventually I realized that it's not the implementation of the idea that's wrong, it's the idea itself that is wrong. That I noticed that my best friend was the son of a local party official, and he had things that a lot of us kids didn't have. First of all, he lived in a special building with much better apartments than everybody else had, and he had imported German furniture. He had Japanese electronics, and he had rock and roll records that we didn't have. And so I recorded a lot of Beatles songs from him, and some other, and some American music. And then I thought, how come the people, his parents, were the ones who were in charge of making sure that we have this economic equality, were making exception for themselves and their children? But they were good people, actually, and I realized they're doing it for the love of their children, which is a human virtue. And then I realized that the system that they were put there to enforce was contradicting with that human virtue. They either had to choose the love for their children or the system. They chose the love for their children. And then I thought that perhaps at some point everybody has to choose, and then if we divide everything equally among everybody, still there would be inequality in the next generation because the parents would always do the best for their children. And so the parents have different abilities, different talents, and different aspirations in life, and so the children would grow up differently. So what happens in such systems where they divide things equally is that the inequality still exists, but it becomes the forced inequality, where you cannot escape, and there is no way to grow out of it because there is no upward mobility. While in a system like the United States, for instance, there is this volunteer economic inequality where people choose to do whatever they want with their lives, and then if you want to really try hard, you can make it and have more money, or you can just relax and enjoy life. And some people do, you know, some people want to be musicians or artists, and they'd rather relax and have a nice life and not enjoy money. They can be still happy.
Right.
All different people have different aspirations, and it's their free will.
And you came to America for that reason precisely, right?
For that reason, I wanted to forget. I was in the opposition. I joined the underground eventually, and I was with the dissidents. I was collecting signatures in support of the dissidents, and I wrote satirical pieces against the socialist government. And then I got tired of it. I moved here. I thought I would forget about everything. I would just live as a normal person with dignity, earn a living honestly without having to prostitute myself, and just forget about politics and enjoy life and have a good future for my children. But it didn't turn out that way. If somebody would tell me back there that I would be in America writing against socialism again, against the same thing, I wouldn't believe it. I had no idea that these ideas would take such a strong hold in this country as well.
Right. And you and I had an opportunity to visit briefly today, and you talked about the watershed moment for you here in America was 9/11. Can you speak about why, and why your views changed, or why your eyes were so opened after that event?
Right. I witnessed the fall of the towers while standing at the foot of the building on Fulton Street. I got out of the train. I was late for work, and that probably saved my life because I was supposed to be right to where the plane struck at 8:45, passing through across the street to my building where I worked. So I saw the whole thing, and this fury that I experienced is still lasting. And at that time I realized that life would never be the same. I already knew that it was the terrorists who did it, because the two planes couldn't be an accident. And I already knew what Islamic terrorism was before, and I started researching things about Islamic terrorism, but then the more I researched, the more I realized that the terrorists themselves would not be so dangerous to this country if they didn't have the fifth column, the enablers inside this country who were helping them, who were giving them moral support. And living in New York, trying to forget about politics, I was, of course, living in this big liberal bubble that is the New York City, where all the media, and most people are very much to the left, even though they're not bad people, they're just very misguided. And I was telling them that, but before it was just a friendly disagreement. After 9/11, I had to break up with some of those friends because I couldn't believe the things they were saying, that America deserved being punished for all the evil that it's done to the world. And all these people who thought they were so open-minded, they thought that they were worldly, and everybody who thought differently from them were just ignorant hicks. And so I was telling them, no, you have no idea what you're talking about. The world is not like you describe it. America actually is perhaps the only force for the good in this world, which I believed from the very beginning. I heard the people who I listened to on the National Public Radio before saying similarly stupid things about America's guilt.
No, it's not.
But you can appreciate the path that I've taken from there to here. And I was reading the New York Times and the Newsweek and Time magazine before, all those authors, and then and the New Yorker magazine, and then the New Yorker published this black, the magazine with a black cover, this infamous copy where they had all the collection of anti-American writings, and I couldn't believe my eyes. How could the American intellectuals, the best of the best, that, or at least they were claiming that they were the best of the best, were saying such insidious things that were not only ignorant but also immoral, absolutely off the mark. So I began my research. I went on the internet. I started discussing on the forums. I started writing articles. And that's when I heard about myself that I'm this ultra-right-wing, conservative, religious nut. Come on, I said.
You're good company.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So after I was called a conservative, right-wing extremist several times, I thought that maybe these conservatives not such bad people. Maybe I should. Maybe I should find out more about them, and then I did, and I found them, and I never looked back.
Well, and so about that time, a couple years after, in New York, a group popped up called Billionaires for Bush, right. And and that was a group that was just going around and claiming that there was this association, and that's. Right. I mean, explain that, and explain what your counter to that was.
Right. In 2004. There was this group, New York theatrical elite created this group, which was in the worst traditions of the Soviet agitprop, from like 1920s even, or the 30s. It was really disgusting to watch them. They were dressing up as these rich billionaires, and they were claiming that Bush is their man, and they would he would do good for the corporations because corporations are better than people. I don't remember exactly their slogans. So a friend of mine suggested, he's also an immigrant from Ireland, Brian McCarthy, a great guy, we're still friends. He said, hey, why don't we create a group called Communists for Kerry? And so we did. We got some friends, half were Americans, half were immigrants. There were some Russian guys, some Jewish Russian guys, some from Ukraine, like me. So one of them dressed up as Lenin, one of them dressed up as Che Guevara. He was an American guy. Actually, he was running for congressman in Florida recently. He moved back to Florida a few years ago. Brian put a wig and a big beard, and he was posing as Fidel Castro. So we were coming out on Union Square, and with the posters, the signs that I created, and we promoted Comrade Kerry as the good communist that we need to elect. And so some people were very angry at us, some New Yorkers, but some thought that we were the real deal. They would come and shake our hands. And even the two DNC workers, we got it captured on camera. They approached us, and they shook our hands, and they said, we're so glad that all kinds of people, groups, and movements support our candidate. Now, that was, I was taking pictures and creating stories, like fantastic stories that had nothing to do with what was really going on, humorous, satirical stories, and I was putting them on the website, and we collected a really great following of very witty people who were posting great funny comments. And eventually, it was closer to the election, we enjoyed like 9,000 individual users a day visiting the website. And after the election, I decided that we would probably, I had to continue this. This was such a great project, so I decided to start a new website that would not have an expiration date, that would not be tied to any particular candidate. So I created a website called thepeoplescube.com. And what is the People's Cube? You know what the Rubik's Cube is, right? So imagine a politically correct Rubik's Cube. That's the symbol of communism. It would have all sides red. So all the squares would be equal, and all the players would be equal. Nobody is too smart, nobody is too slow. Everybody's equal, no matter how you solve it, and it's also colorblind friendly. So the ultimate symbol of political correctness. So this is the People's Cube, and everybody is invited to visit it.
In fact, I definitely want. Prior to reading this, I had not heard of the People's Cube, and now I am completely addicted. And just very quickly pulled off the website 3 of the propaganda pieces that are up there that I think the gang will enjoy. Can we just pull a couple of them up? I don't know if you can maybe read this. Excuse me. Obama focuses on jobs, businesses, and the small people, one little guy at a time, and he's got the magnifying glass that he is setting people on fire with.
Right, because that's what happens when he focuses on people. Right.
And why don't you go through the next one?
You probably have heard about this Occupy Wall Street. That is happening right now. They are on Wall Street and they're demanding basically socialism, to dismantle the system, to dismantle capitalism. And they are enjoying moral support. I saw a picture of a guy holding a sign there that said, the corrupt fear us, the honest support us, and the heroes join us. So he himself considers himself a hero. And so these people, the implication here is that the morality of the environment in which they do it supports them. It's the morality that promotes redistribution of wealth and denigrates the very existence of private property, and which is crucial to our human civilization.
We have one more up here, just because we are constantly being talked about in terms of the Jim Crow laws that we are extending.
Right.
And so, you know, this is the capture and return runaways from the Democrat Party's liberal plantation.
Right. That one was actually created by a friend of mine who is a great guy. His nickname on the cube is Super Commissar Maxim. And actually, he started very awkwardly at first on the cube with some crude Photoshop images, but then he quickly developed into a real master of Photoshop, and he's very witty, very smart, intelligent. He works as a carpenter in Idaho somewhere. And
have you ever met him?
No, I never met him.
No.
But we've been in communication for several years now. And it's, you know, America is so full of talented people.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't necessarily have to be college educated. And I think my website has collected the best bunch, the most informed, the wittiest, the funniest group on the internet.
Oh, it's great. Those are just 3 of many, of many. You also wrote an essay that I think was in many ways sort of the first foray into what was to become the shakedown socialism, and you published it in Pajamas Media, right? Called Obama the Pitchfork Operator, right?
Right.
And you recount a time in history, and if you would, I'd love for you to share the story tonight, because it just really spoke in such parallel to what we're seeing. And it was, I guess, around 1917 when the communists nationalized the Siberian gold mines. And can you tell us that?
Right. It starts with actually the entire book was written as a response to readers' comments, to readers' letters asking me to expand on this idea. Originally, I wrote an essay based on this quote from Obama when he gathered leaders of American financial industry in his Oval Office, and leaders of American financial industry in his Oval Office, and he said, "I'm the only thing that stands between you and the pitchforks." But the pitchforks were actually organized by him. They were the effort of the unions and the acorn. So that reminded me of the tactics that Stalin used in the USSR in order to bamboozle, basically, the foreign investors, the British gold concession miners. After the revolution, when everything was nationalized, the industries started falling apart. You know, one of the basic premises of communists when they took the power was that once they take the factories away from the owners and give them to the workers, the productivity inventions would start coming from the workers, that the workers would work conscientiously for themselves, and so the abundance would follow very quickly. But that never happened, because without economic incentives, people just stop working, and if you start sharing the product of your labor, then you always start looking behind somebody else's shoulder and counting other people's money, and if somebody is working less, you think you would be the fool to work harder if everybody else is slacking off. So everybody started slacking off, and the productivity fell, and the only way to increase that productivity was with terror. So I think Stalin's terror regime was an inevitable result of that. It wasn't just his personal failing. It was the inevitable result of the socialist system. But back to the gold mines, this gold mining industry was in ruins. So Bukharin, who was in charge of economy then, who was one of the leading theoreticians of communism in the USSR, suggested this plan to bring British companies to resurrect this gold mining in Siberia. And so they did. The British brought their equipment with them, they trained the workers, and the industry started working well, giving the gold. And the workers were paid the highest salaries in the entire country. But then suddenly a union strike happened. The unions told the British that we're not satisfied with the conditions, we need to raise the salaries, we need to increase the benefits. And the British managers were surprised, but there was no other way to run the company because nobody was working, so they had to give in. Then a couple of months later, another strike, and they demand even more. The managers are saying, "You're already getting more money than anybody in this country, more than the government is getting. So how come you're demanding it?" But the unions were uncompromising, and so the British wrote the letter to the Soviet government, and the government responded. You see, we are the workers' government. We're the country of the workers. They own everything. We do not decide, they decide. So we cannot tell our workers not to strike. So the Brits figured out that they were in a trap. They abandoned everything, they cut the losses, and they left. So they left the developed industry, the machinery, and everything. After that, for a few years, things kept working, and then they started to fall apart again, because immediately, right after the British left, the workers' salaries were cut to the level of everybody else in the country. And of course, it was not the workers' initiative to do the strike. It was all the plan from the very beginning of Bukharin and Stalin, who figured that they would use the unions in order to make the Brits leave after they have restored the industry. And they used the unions, and then what happened? The workers enjoyed the best life they had under the Brits. Now, after the strike, when the Brits left, they became poor again, like everybody else in the country. So, and every time Bukharin would tell this story, Stalin would ask him to tell this story to the Politburo, or every time at a drinking party. And he would tell this story, and they would all be laughing their pants off because they thought they were so clever. Now, when I heard Obama doing a similar thing, I immediately recalled that story, and so I wrote about it. And then I had responses from the readers asking me to expand on the role of the unions in the USSR. And so I went into explaining, and that the result is this book. Well, it starts with the first chapter is dedicated to the story of the unions in the USSR, how they helped the communists to come to power, and eventually they lost all the power, because when the government is in charge of the industries, then the unions become redundant, because the government already is doing what the unions were supposed to do. And when you're in competition with the government, you always lose. So the unions lost, and they were absorbed into the state, and the workers' rights were slashed to the bone. The workers had no rights at all, eventually. So that was completely self-defeating on the union's part. And then afterwards, there was only one recorded strike in the Soviet history, and unions had no part in it. That strike was brutally suppressed in the 1960s, and then after that the unions were quiet until the Soviet Union fell apart. That's when the unions became active again, and because their leadership was all made of old hardline communists. And once the Soviet Union fell apart, the unions again resumed the role of these kind of conductors of communism into the society. They were doing everything they could to undermine the new democracies that appeared in place of the USSR.
I think you said it here, you know, and this just really had a profound impact on me. You wrote, if some people had wings and others didn't, and the government wanted to enforce fairness, soon no one would have wings, because wings cannot be redistributed. They can only be broken. Right. And I think that that's where we're headed. Right,
and that's where the morality of socialism lies, because socialism is inherently immoral. The socialists, the leftists claim the moral high ground, but the morality is the only ground on which they can be defeated. We can attack the political figures all we want, but they will be replaced by different ones of exactly the same kind. It's a never-ending story. But if remove that heap of garbage on which they stand, claiming that this is the high moral ground, then they will become the midgets that they really are, and everybody will see that the emperor actually has no clothes.
Right.
And so that's how we should approach this, and explain to people that the high moral ground is actually non-existent there. That the only moral society that supports human dignity and human spirit is the capitalist society, where there is liberty and free choice for people. Now, we started with the wings. The reason why this socialist system is immoral is because equality can only be enforced one way. You cannot elevate people to make them equal, because people are all born different. But you can always bring them down to the lowest common denominator. And that's what they eventually wind up doing, regardless of their claims to the contrary.
And your book lays clear. I mean, it's the simplicity in which you write things really hits home. That given the path that we're on, there is, without groups like the Tea Parties or other liberty-minded groups that are going to step up and say, you know, the emperor has no clothes, there is only one outcome for the direction that our country is headed, unless there's a game changer, and that game changer has to be us, because it's not going to be the government. I know that we have people out here that have questions, so let's do this. You stay here, and we're going to go just do some housekeeping real quick, and we're going to start picking up cards. So if you've had questions, please pass them in. And for those of you that are with us for the first time, and we failed to tell you that we take questions, surprise, there are little cards on the back of the chairs, and if you have questions, scribble them down real quick. We do something called 10 in 2. We also pass the cowboy hat. It is an every Monday tradition that we pass cowboy hats to keep us afloat. And we so appreciate your generosity. If you feel like what we do has value, please contribute. And if you are watching online, there is a donate button somewhere near my face. Please donate. Surprise, we are not being funded by the government. We do not share a grant with NPR. We need help. Please, please give. We appreciate it so much. And now, and I warn you, we're going to do the 10 and 2. This is the gauntlet for our guests. The idea is we're going to ask 10 questions and ask you to limit your answers to 2 minutes or less, and that way we get a lot of questions and we still wrap up on time. Do we have questions? Questions. Oh, right up front. We could ask questions all night, and I'm hopeful that some of these questions are things that I didn't get to. And again, I cannot tell you. I mean, your quotes that, you know, when you talked about P.J. O'Rourke and his comments about being in the Bronx and talking about poverty, and it was just so well done.
It's something else.
So well done. Okay. Question. How did New Russia split all of the assets of the people?
You mean in 1917 or in 1991? Which New Russia?
Yeah. The newest New Russia, I guess.
Well, no, they actually didn't split. It's not a socialist country anymore. They actually did some privatization and monetization. But it's a long story. Unfortunately, a group of advisors that came from the United States to help Russia with this transition to capitalism was made of Clinton advisors. And one of them was, I think, Larry Summers, who is now advising Obama. So that ended with the breakdown of the economy and the default that Russia ended. So now if the same people are in charge of this country, then you can expect a similar thing happen here.
Okay, this gets back to the use of propaganda, something you know the power of. How do you expose the left for what they are if the media supports them?
You can only do it on the personal level, I guess. Well, first of all, the way I do it is I started a website because whatever I was writing, nobody wanted to publish. I created images, I created stories and essays. They were always rejected, and then I decided to just start my own website and start displaying my work there. That's one thing. Another thing is in private conversations with people, some people are doubters, some are not. There are maybe like 20% of the people on our side. There are maybe as many dedicated leftists, but then there is about 60% in the middle, the so-called sandwich people. And those sandwich people are the ones who need to be convinced. So in talking to them, the left has very alluring message that we're all brothers, we're all equal, we have to also own equal things. But that idea is an optical illusion, and we need to tell that exactly, that idea actually leads to the breakdown of the human spirit, of the human dignity, and the only possible system is the moral system based on the human nature that is conducive to human nature is the capital system that was created in the United States, and unfortunately is breaking down right now because people don't appreciate what they have. So we need. I'm constantly amazed at how many people in the United States appreciate what they have, and I'm really grateful for that, like this crowd, for instance. But at the same time, I'm amazed how many people in the United States don't appreciate what they have. This is also, food for thought.
Yes.
Why? No,
are you asking me?
I mean, no.
I can tell you.
It's a rhetorical question, but go ahead.
Okay. My grandfather marched with the Bolsheviks in Russia. Mm-hmm. He moved to the U.S. in early 20th century because the Bolsheviks betrayed the Russians. Why don't we just call these liberals communists, as they truly are, and alert the world alert the world that their assertions and plans and values are betrayed and thus open debate to a higher level. To say communist now seems to be unacceptable. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are some technical things that I have to explain. Well, communism as an idea stems from this Marxist theory that there is an ideal society where inhabited by these ultimate collectivists who value the common good more than their self-interest, who actually do not have any self-interest at all, who work conscientiously, and there is abundance of everything. That is the society that was described to me when I was a child. In order to achieve that society, humans have to go through the stage called socialism. The socialism can only be built on the grounds of a developed capitalist system, when the industries have already been developed that can be redistributed, and the factories could be given to the workers, and then, like I said previously, the productivity would soar, but that didn't happen. The third condition for the victory of communism is that the entire world has to turn to socialism before communism can be achieved. And that is why the Soviet Union was exporting the revolution everywhere they could, and that's why the KGB agents were all over the world trying to stir discontent and supporting, giving money to all kind of subversive groups and revolutionaries. And so the American government and the CIA were only trying to catch up with the KGB. They were not proactive, they were reactive. Of course, the liberal media turns it the other way. They're portraying the CIA as the initiator of all the evil things in the world. But they were just trying to respond to what the KGB was already doing. And so that was another precondition. There were three preconditions. The third one was the creation of a new man, the breeding of a new man who would be the ultimate collectivist, who would not doubt a moment to sacrifice himself for the group. And that new man, creation of the new man, was the goal of the Soviet education system, Soviet entertainment, Soviet media, and the same as here. The education, the media, the entertainment industries are all dedicated to this idea, to work on your brain and turn you or the growing generation into this new man, the politically correct man. And only in the USSR it was mandatory. Here they're doing it voluntarily. Like I said today, that there are two views of human nature. Is that one is that the human nature is as it was created and it cannot be changed, and so the human society has to adapt to our nature. And capitalism is the best form of such an adaptation to the human nature, where the most of the people can be happy and productive and prosperous. Now, another view is that the human mind is a social construct, and so that construct can be manipulated with certain levers, and so with a changed mind, a different society can be achieved. And this is what the liberals are doing through education. This is what Bill Ayers, Obama's friend, is doing. He's writing, if you go to his website, you will see that all his works are about teaching teachers how to teach socialism to children.
It's stunning that it's happening in plain sight. It's happening in plain sight.
So the socialism and communism are not exactly the same things, and there are different varieties of socialism right now. The European socialism does not necessarily have the goal of achieving communism. They're just trying to redistribute wealth out of this guided concept of justice. Now, of course, if you take all these different movements, different varieties of socialism, they still end up in the same idea of economic equality which I described in the book.
That's right. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Okay, here's a good question. Please explain the importance of us becoming right-wing propagandists.
Why it is important? You know, one of the encouraging things right now is that wherever I go, whoever I speak with in different parts of the country, I see the people are becoming more and more politically aware and active. And thanks to Obama. If it weren't for Obama, it wouldn't be happening, right? So when I first came to this country in '94, I didn't see this movement. It just didn't exist. Right now, there are so many people who have educated themselves about the Constitution, about the American system and the liberties, and good for them. And this needs to be spread. The more the better. The more people realize, understand this, the better off we will all be.
That's right. We've got to get ahead of the narrative.
We have to do it for our children. You know, do it for the children, right? That's exactly where this term applies. I mean, this phrase works.
Right, and it's true. We have to, right. Or we will lose it.
Because oftentimes it's used by liberals in a way that actually will harm the children. But in this case, it applies correctly.
Well, then that leads us to our next question. What are the simplest one or two things that we need to do to beat back the, as this person wrote, socialist, commies, pinkos?
Well, I already said that morality, explaining the immorality of socialism, the inherent immorality, is very important. Socialism always leads to the degradation of society, to great suffering and destruction of the human spirit and of property and poverty and wars even. So what kind of great goal can I mean, how can you call an idea that has such results moral? There is no way this can be moral. This is immoral to say the least, to put it mildly. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, humor and satire have this power that serious conversation doesn't have. Ridiculing liberals, well, let's call them, I call them progressives, or for short, progs. So I have the prog detector, you know, I call it progdar. And so they fear ridicule more than anything else, because they are the people who feed off the second-hand opinions. They value other people's opinions more than their own. Most of the time they do not have their own worldview. They do not possess absolute standards. Mm-hmm. So they always look at other people's approval of them. Mm-hmm. If you start ridiculing them, they cannot tolerate that. They would probably just give up and stop doing what they're doing, or that may cause them to think, and if they start thinking, hopefully they would come up with something good.
Okay, and then we're just gonna, this is a good one. How come so many Russians are hungry with so many natural resources in the country? Now, I think it probably explains itself in the political system, but why don't you articulate exactly why that would be?
Well, what is happening in Russia right now is not exactly capitalism, it is a crony capitalism, oligarchical form of capitalism, where nobody cares about the country anymore, and they just are trying to steal as much as possible. The cynicism is unbelievable that exists there right now. They now have the freedom to talk. They can say anything they want, and so much irrational garbage is being spewed on TV, on the radio, in the media. Anybody can say anything they want. There are no standards, no beliefs, no principles, no faith anymore. People believe in the weirdest things, and so the government still can do anything they want. And what they do is basically they get hold of the oil and oil industries. They have the hold of all the oligarchs. You're familiar with Khodorkovsky, who is serving jail. He was just one of the oligarchs. Yes, he was guilty of a few things, but so are all the other oligarchs. Why aren't they in jail? It's because he was the only one who wanted to get into politics. The other ones are keeping quiet. So he was Putin made a case out of him to show the others. If you start getting into politics, this is where you are. Otherwise, be friends, bring me, share with me whatever you make, and I'll keep you safe. And this is what's happening. Here is the big pipeline, so he wants to award somebody, he just gives a hole in that pipeline to his friend. So you're sitting on this hole, and you have to give me like whatever the percentage is. And that's how the system works. Russia hardly produces anything anymore. All the wealth is coming from oil, and he's been very lucky lately because the price of oil keeps getting up, and so the country is getting a lot of cash, a lot of petrodollars are flowing in, and so far he's doing all right. Once there is a problem with oil, or if the prices go down, he will have to find some other way to survive.
And I believe Putin actually has said to Obama, don't take a lesson from the pages of our history and don't go down this road.
Right. I don't often agree with Putin, but this one was a keeper.
And last question. If we could only take away one thing tonight, if you could have one comment that would sink down into the bones of everybody here, what would you want that to be?
The leftists believe that their idea of economic equality is so great that sacrificing a human life is a small price to pay to achieve that great goal. But all my experience and all my work tell me that economic inequality as it exists now is a small price to pay to keep living as decent, normal human beings in a prosperous society with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I believe you're going to be back here with books, signing books, right? And for those of you that have more questions, please feel free to talk to Oleg. He's going to be back in the back table there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Oleg. Please join me in thanking Oleg Atbashian. This has been fantastically helpful. Thank you again. Thank all of you for coming. God bless each and every one of you. God bless America. See you next Monday.